My name is Shibata. I'm one of the co-editors of Monkey Business, and this is Ted Goossen. I represent monkey side of Monkey Business, and business side is presented by Ted Goossen, I guess. Yes. I'd like to thank everyone from Asia Society and the Japan Foundation New York and Public Space, the great literary journal in Brooklyn. Our format is a dialogue between one American author and one Japanese author, and we have two dialogues. And the first panel is going to be done between the Japanese author Hiroko Oyamada and the American author Brian Evenson. Let me briefly and it will be moderated by Ted. Let me briefly introduce the two authors. These are the two books Ms. Oyamada has published in Japan. The first one on the left is called The Factory. The second one on the right is The Whole. Okay. Somebody last night described her as the Japanese female Kafka, and he was not far wrong. I think Japanese literature these days is in a very good shape, and some authors are realists and very good at depicting the difficulty of living in contemporary Japanese society. And some are fantasists creating very surrealistic and absurd space, which has always been the strong element in traditional Japanese literature. But what's marvelous about Ms. Oyamada is she manages to do both at the same time. Okay, and the American author she'll be talking to is Brian Evenson. I'm sort of hesitant about introducing him to you. It's introducing American author to an American audience is what we call in Japan teaching Buddhism to Buddha. But Brian Evenson is a genre-bending and rule-breaking writer, if there ever is one. And no matter what his tone is, it may be very surrealistic, it may be violent, it may be simply absurd. There is always the sense of the conflict between somebody's personal sense of reality and more public sense of reality. And we like to think that the moments of that kind of conflict are exceptions rather than the rule, but his fiction seems to suggest they are the rule rather than exceptions. So, Ms. Oyamada and Mr. Evenson. Okay. Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Okay, first I'd like to thank everyone who makes this event possible, especially Mr. Honda from the Japan Foundation, who's an old friend of mine from Toronto, and also Meg Taylor, who's here, who is our general editor, gives us huge help in the creation of the of Monkey Business, and Tiffany. And Tiffany's in the back. Tiffany does a multitude of things. And of course, you'll be meeting Roland Kelts later. So we have a real team. This has been, now it's our 7th edition over 7 years. And as we've worked together, we've been able to achieve something, I think, which is very unusual. You cannot imagine how difficult it is to come out with a journal each year with contemporary literature. You know, the process of translation, of editing. We have a team of translators who are fabulous. But it's still a kind of remarkable achievement looking back on it. And this seventh issue, I think, is of particular interest. So I hope you all have a good time reading it. Now, what we're going to do now is have a dialogue between Brian Evenson and Hiroko Oyamada. And I'll be moderating it, and Shibata-san will be interpreting for Oyamada-san. So perhaps I'll ask Oyamada-san first. I've been reading your work now for a short while, but with great interest, and it's fascinating. I really love the way that you write. And one of the themes that jumps out at me is this sense of confinement. Confinement of various kinds, and there's something often a little bit claustrophobic about your writing, but there's also a kind of a black humor that comes across, and I'm just wondering, what is, in your mind at least, where does this come from, and what are you doing with it?
そういうこう閉じられた感覚っていうのはどこから来るんでしょうか。それをどういうふうに使ってる。
はい。Hello everyone. My name is Hiroko Oyamada. I'm so happy to be here. そうですね。意識をそんなに深くしているわけではないんですけれども、結果的に今ご指摘のことはすごくよくわかります。
I'm not all that conscious about the theme of confinement, but it turns out that my writing is often about that subject. I really understand that.
とりわけそれを最近すごく意識的自分でもそうなんだなって思うようになったのは、一番は家族であるとか血であるとか、あるいは婚姻によるそういった家族やそういうつながりによる包囲というかです。
Actually, I'm more conscious about that subject because I think more often about the subject of family, blood kinship, and family relationship, and that gives me the idea of sense of confinement.
So actually, I'm sorry, jumped the gun a bit. As an example of what we're talking about, I think it would be good now to have Hiroko-san read one of her short stories, and we'll have the English translation simultaneously on the screen here. So those of you who don't understand Japanese can know what she's saying.
世話。私は3歳の娘を抱いて実家の前庭に出た。見慣れぬ黒い服の母が縁側に座り庭を見ていた。母のサンダルのつま先にこぼれ種のホウセンカが咲いている。夕方近く、空は水で薄めたような色をしていた。私は母の隣に娘を抱いて座った。黒く見えた母の服は紫に同色の糸で水玉模様が織り出された昔からよく着ていた夏のワンピースだった。娘はうつむいて T シャツに縫い付けられたリボンの飾りをいじっている。母は足をぶらつかせながら庭が荒れて困るとこぼした。お父ちゃんが亡くなってから庭に手が取れなくて、生垣からは枝が飛び出し、そこここに雑草とも園芸種ともつかない花が咲き、芝生はところどころ乾いてめくれ上がり、確かに祖父が丹精していた頃と比べると全体がぼやけていたが、荒れ果てているというほどでもない。仕方ないよ。大体が手間のかかる庭なのよ。この家は母の生家で、入り婿だった父は祖父より祖母より先に病没した。母は自分が生まれ育った家で夫を看取り、娘を嫁がせ、父を看取り、寝ついた母の面倒を見ている。実家には他に仕事が長続きしない弟がニコニコと パソコンの番をして暮らしている。私は芝生の上、少し先に白いビニール袋が落ちているのに気づいた。何あれ、ゴミ？母がぬっと首を回して私の顔を見た。眉が不審そうに潜められた。いや、あの白い袋、膜が張ったような妙な目つき。ああ、あれ。母はハムシでも飛び込んできたのか、ぎゅっと目をつぶった。そしてゆっくり開くと、私の耳に口を寄せて、トマトよ。トマト？母が立った。使い古しなのか、くしゃくしゃの袋を持ち上げると、中から真っ赤なトマトが3つ、ごろりと芝生に転がり出た。焼け色の芝生の上で、張り詰めた皮がらんらんと赤かった。うちの畑のよ。前庭の向こうには小さい家庭菜園があって、確かに今はトマトが実っているが、今年は気候のせいか尻が熟れきっているのに、肩が青く硬いままいびつにいじけたような実が多い。落ちているのはそんな出来損ないとは違う立派でおいしそうなトマトだった。さんよ。母は共通の知人を呼ぶ時のような口調で私の知らない名前を言った。さんが勝手に入ってきてトマト取っていって配るの。誰に？近所の人とか。なんで？お父ちゃんがぜひともそうしてくれって言ったって。ざわざわとした話し声が遠くから聞こえた。アブラゼミが鳴いている。そりゃお父ちゃんはああいう性格だし、昔から知ってる相手だもんでそう言ったか知らないけども、でももらった方はうちのトマト何やかや気に入らないっていうの。水やりが下手だの、虫食いがあるだの、そもそも苗が悪いだの。それでさんもそうかそうかってうちに返しに来るの。勝手に取ってたトマトをこうやって。本当？本当。それって私は何と言うべきか少し考えた後、ひどくない？と言った。もっと何か違うことを言いたかったが思い浮かばなかった。母はうなずいた。本当にひどい。お父ちゃんが亡くなってからよ、こんな風に。ケイちゃん。急に母が娘の名を小さく叫んだ。娘の顔を覗くと、彼女は目を開いて母の足元にあるトマトをじっと見つめていた。トマトの表面に凍った一点の陽光が娘の黒目に映っている。ポチッとした白い光。母が震え声で、ケイちゃんまで。こんにちは。門扉の方から間延びした声がした。小柄な特等のおじいさんが門扉の向こうからこちらを見ていた。祖父が着ていたようなネズミ色のジャンパー、丸い背中、柔和な顔になんとなく見覚えがある。おじいさんはにっと笑うと母を見て、古川さんと言った。母は答えず大股でこちらに来ると、私の隣にぴったりくっついて座った。古川さん。私も長年呼ばれていた名字、はいと答えそうになったのを母が片手で膝に触れ制した。煮えたぎった油の音でセミが鳴いた。気がつくと下の方からじわじわと何かがせり上がってきていた。黒い、いや暗い。あっと思った時にはもう辺りが暗くなっていた。真っ暗で何も、膝の上の娘も隣の母も庭も何も見えない。月も星もない真夜中だってこんなに暗くはない。私は目を閉じた。何か妙に温かいものが私の背中に触れた。びっくりとしたが、それは母が腕を伸ばして私の背に回したのだった。娘の向こう側からも母の手。母が三角形に私と娘を抱いた。私も娘をしっかと抱いた。娘の背は滑らかに息づき、頬を寄せると唾液の匂い。大丈夫。悪いものに持っていかれたりはしていない。差し当たり、それが一番大事なことだ。プンとトマトの匂いがした。母が私たちを抱いたまま上下に揺れていた。足で地団打を踏むような動き。ピチャッ、ピチャッと何かが粘る音。闇は密度を増した。 この上なく暗いのにまだ暗くなる。闇の奥からおじいさんの声がした。古川さん、これうちのいつもの。私の足首に水滴のようなものが散った。むんと青臭い。いつもどうも。女性の声がした。震えるようにかすかな高い。いつもどうも。母が、また調子良くなったらこっち顔出すようにって言ってね。本当に母が喜びます。いつもいつも。多少無理したって外出ないと寝たきりになっちゃっちゃ。年寄りは足から来るんだから。いつもどうも。もっとずっと長生きしないとね。お父さんの分まで。母が喜びます。ふふふふ。じゃあジョリジョリジョジョジョ。アブラゼミが声を叩きつけながら空に飛び上がった。それじゃ。門扉がきしんだ。母が腕の力を抜いた。私はそっと目を開けた。先ほどまでと同じ夕刻の前際だった。空が黄ばみ始めているあたりにコウモリが飛び交っている。門扉の向こうに歩き去るおじいさんが見えた。後ろ姿が祖父によく似ていた。母は息をついて抱擁を解いた。汗で張り付いた背中に風が通った。母の傍らに中に何か丸いものが入った白いビニール袋が置いてあった。薄いビニールから赤い色が透けている。丸い赤い手のひらに乗るくらいの大きさのトマト。家の中から祖母が母を呼ぶ甲高い声が聞こえた。母が縁側から立ち上がって家に入ると、重みに耐えかねたように袋が傾いて中からトマトがこぼれ出た。どこからともなく醤油と砂糖の重だるい匂いがした。私たちのすぐそばで別のアブラゼミが鳴き始めた。
Thank you very much. Now we're going to have a reading from Brian Evenson. I should mention, perhaps it wasn't clear before, but Monkey Business is based on a Japanese literary magazine originally called Monkey Business. Now there's a new manifestation called Monkey. And in those journals, Motoyuki Shibata's translations really stand out and form a large part of their content. So it's Japanese writers.
Because that way we don't have to pay the translators. I'm editor, so I don't get paid for that.
So Brian Evenson is known to Japanese readers that way and through other publications, all translated by Motoyuki Shibata. And so it makes a lot of sense for there to be, as you'll see when you read your copy of Monkey Business, American writers and Japanese writers placed side by side. And you can even feel a certain resonance between their writing. And I think that's especially true with these two writers. So now, to give you an example of that, we'll have a reading by Brian.
Hi, it's very good to be here. In addition to the fiction I do things that I like to call reports, which are kind of a blend of fiction and essay, and maybe take advantage of either the strengths or the weaknesses on each form, depending on how tired I am. So I'm going to read you a report about toes. A report on toes. If I sit with my legs crossed, my 15-month-old son, M, will sometimes unexpectedly bite my big toe. He does not do this hard enough to hurt me, but the look he sometimes flashes me while doing it lets me know he knows he could hurt me if he wanted. English is curious in that it has a specific singular word for the thumb, i.e. thumb, but none for the big toe. Thumb is evocative, a word that sounds like it is being said around the shape of a thumb lodged in the mouth. Big toe is simply descriptive, as if the namer of parts of the body was tired by the time his gaze fell that low. Big toe says, look at the toes, find the biggest one, and there you have it, you've arrived, there's nothing more to be said. When it comes to toes, however, Spanish is worse. Not only does the language not have a word for the big toe, it doesn't have a specific word for toes. Fingers are dedos, and toes too are dedos. If you don't know which you're talking about, you can slap on de mano, of hand, or de pie, of foot. In English, we have the word limb that can refer either to arms or to legs or to certain tree branches for that matter. But we also have the word arm and the word leg. If we only had the word limb, we'd have to say limbs with toes on the end, or limbs with fingers on the end, or limbs with branches on the end. But if we were Spanish, we'd have to say limbs with digits of feet on the end, and limbs with digits of fingers on the of hands on the end. I don't know what we'd have to say for tree limbs. Probably just that, tree limbs. In any case, it would be sufficiently exhausting that we'd stop talking about our limbs, in the same way that I assume Spanish-speaking peoples avoid speaking about their fingers and toes. It's just not worth the effort.
So I'll continue then with the discussion that we started at the beginning, and ask Brian. Having read a number of your works now, I get a sense that perhaps in a slightly different way than Oyamada-san, your work also deals with confinement, and I'm interested in how, in a sense, how that fits, or what you do through that trope to what you're expressing.
I do think that's true. My stories are sometimes very claustrophobic in terms of that level of confinement. And I think it does have something to do with, I'm an excommunicated Mormon, and so was raised in that particular culture, which is a very warm but also insular culture, and makes this distinction between being in the world and being of the world. And the idea that you can, you're both inside of something and separate from it at the same time. And that probably has something to do with my interest in confinement.
That's very interesting. And it recalls to me discussions that I've had with people about how Japan modernized, how it managed to break free of certain kind of feudal restrictions. And the comparison that's often made is that in the West, it was by breaking from Christianity, from the limitations of Christianity, that people developed a new, freer self. Whereas in Japan, it wasn't religion so much as it was the family, or particularly the traditional family. And I wonder, Hiroko-san, if you see a certain parallel there as well.
そういうなんかこう平行関係みたいなのを西洋と日本で感じたりしますかね。
すごくよくわかります。
That makes very good sense to me.
まさに日本のその家族の血ですね、血のつながりと伴う結婚によるつながりの強さはある意味宗教的だと今まさに指摘されてよく思いました。
The sense of the blood kinship in Japanese families, and which is created by marriage, is, as you pointed out, is very similar to the sense of religion.
Again, with remembering some of those conversations, I think, especially when I was a graduate student, we assumed that religion was passing from the scene. But of course, it's not exactly true, and religion has made something of a comeback. Is in Japan's case, is the family as well reconstituting itself, or is the movement continuing to be away from the extended family towards, let's say, more nuclear or even individual types of arrangements?
Yes. Yeah. Are you asking questions?
Yes, that's the question. So the question again is whether, insofar as we've seen recently, religion has revived in certain sectors, at least, of our society, whether the same thing could be said of the family in Japan. Is it a present threat?
そうですね。おそらくそれは正しいと思いま
I
す。
think that's probably true.
そしてすごくこう問題なのはその家族のつながりへ対する圧力、囲い込む力っていうのが中からではなく当然外から、つまり 本人の欲していないところでそれをすごく圧されているっていうのを感じるっていうところだと
The
思います。
problem is that this pressure that family members have to be close to each other comes not so much from the inside the family, but from the society outside.
多くの日本の特に私のような比較的若い家族の世代のものはすごく引き裂かれていて、その家族が家族であるべきだっていう価値観が分かる部分もとてもある。一方で例えば働いたりいろんな関係を作るにおいてそれを否定するような教育を受けた部分もあるわけですよね。
We from the younger generation are very much torn between two ideas about this subject. On one hand, we do feel that the family has to be maintained. We understand and we sympathize with that idea. But on the other hand, especially when you have a job and when you spend a lot of time outside, we like to get out of that confinement, and we've been actually partly educated to feel that way. You have to be individuals rather than members of a family.
そのために罪悪感を感じるところがすごく宗教的だと思います。
So tone feelings makes you feel guilty, and that guilty feeling is very much very similar to the idea of religion.
Yeah, I think it's actually quite similar in some ways to the culture I grew up in, just because Mormonism is probably the most family-focused religion, and there's a very strong insistence on even the idea that you can live with your family after death. So family is not only something that happens in life, but it continues on forever. You can never escape your family. I will say something very quickly to Hiroko-san. I told my son, who is 4 years old now, about this story that you just read, just summarized it, and he said at the end, these are very mysterious tomatoes. I'm wondering if you feel that all vegetables are mysterious or just tomatoes.
野菜はみんなその神秘的だと感じますか？
でも神秘的ですよね。
They are mysterious, aren't they?
そう、だってなんか種とか根っことかですもんね。
There are seeds and roots.
そう、特にでもトマトはなんとなく魚せない感じがします。自由に扱えない感じがします。異質じゃないですか。中がゼリーみたいになって種があってなんとなくより神秘的なんじゃないでしょうか。
I think tomatoes especially especially mysterious because there is something so different from the outside in the tomatoes, and it's so I really find it I hesitate to handle tomatoes.
Can I ask too about one thing that Moto said at the beginning was that there's an interaction of the realistic or the domestic, I think would be the other thing to call it, and the fantastic in your fiction. How do you figure out how to balance that? How do you know when you can be strange and when you need to give us grounding?
そうですね。非常に考えます。
I'm very conscious about that.
最初に一番最初の第一項でさえないもうその初めの塊のようなものを書いた段階では多くの場合、現実じゃない方がおそらく勝っている。
With my very first drafts, with most works, the fantastical side is stronger than the other one.
よく私は夢をもとに書くんですけど、まさに夢のような感じですね。フィーリングはあるけども全くそこに流れるその ルールがないというか。
I often write my stories based on my dreams, and the very first drafts tend to be very much like dreams. So there is some kind of continuity going on, but there's no sense.
それを人に渡すためには、ある程度切ったり足したり包んだりっていうようなことがないと、それは作品にはおそらくならないと思います。
And before I can hand it to my editor, there's so much I have to adjust, and otherwise it wouldn't be called artistic work.
Should we have some questions, do you think?
Sure.
Yeah. We still have a few minutes for questions. We have, of course, another panel that immediately follows this one, so we can't go too long, but certainly we'd be happy to respond to any questions you may have to either of the writers or both.
I'd like to ask Oyamada-san who has influenced her Japanese in terms of Japanese literature and Western literature.
その日本文学で影響を受けた人、その西洋文学で影響を受けた人。
そうですね、日本で影響を受けた人はおそらくたくさんいすぎて自覚をしてない人が多いと思うんですけれども、はっきり思うところがあるのはそうですね、生野頼子さん、多分読んだことある方は全然似てないと思うと思うんですけれども、そこはすごく思うところがあります。
There are so many writers who have influenced me, and sometimes the influence must be unconscious, so I may not even aware of them. But the one writer I'm very conscious of having been influenced is a contemporary writer named Yoriko Shono.
ちょっと彼女について説明できます？はい。
彼女も幻想の部分、幻想に読める部分がたくさんあるんですけれども、そこにはもう確固たる彼女というものが常にあって。
Yes, probably my readers won't recognize the influence from her in my work. We are so different, even though there is a strong, fantastical element in her work. But the difference is that even in surrealistic passages, you can always feel the presence of the author. The author Yoriko Shono. You very much feel it all the time.
そういうものを読んでいるととても勇気づけられますし、そして、どんな形でも作品には作者が当然出てくるんですけれども、その一つの究極の形のように私は思っています。
I'm really heartened and encouraged by reading her work. I mean, no matter what kind of work it may be, I think we can always feel the presence of the author, but hers must be a very extreme, strong case, and I'm really encouraged by it.
で西洋ですね。
西洋の作家については、マリオ・バルガス・リョサですねの、緑の家という作品にすごく影響を受けて、私はデビュー作となる小説を書こうと思いました。
As for Western literature, I like to mention Mario Vargas Llosa's The Green Mansion, probably in the English translation. And I was heavily influenced by that. I was really impressed by that book, and that made me write my very first fiction.
We have another question over there.
I noticed in both of the readings there were small children behaving like animals a little bit, biting and clawing.
小さい子供が出て
So behaving naturally like small children do?
子供が動物みたいな。
But the way they're described, they seemed like these little reckless creatures. Maybe that's just my interpretation. I'm wondering, for both of you, how or if you use them as devices, how they figure in your work.
Little children?
Yeah.
そういう子供をなんか一緒のこう装置。
And this is particularly pertinent because both writers have small children, about the same age.
4 years old, 3.5.
So children, for some reason, figure a lot in my work, and I think it's partly because, in childhood, your sense of the world is so different. All the things that we kind of accept as the rules about how things work, children don't have. Things that we see as contradictions, children don't see as contradictions. You can have an experience as an adult where you think you see one thing and it turns out to be another thing, and you think, oh, I've misseen that. But children can think, oh, what I thought was a bird was in fact a leaf. And first it was a bird, and now it's a leaf, and it was two things. So I think that there is this kind of magic in childhood that is quite interesting, and one of the things I go back to. And so, but yeah, it's true. I don't know why there's so many feral children. I think if you have a four-year-old, you just think, it is like living with a small panther all the time. And my son, if he can't sleep, he wants us to get up. And if we try to bring him into the bed, he'll start rolling back and forth over us. And just children are very, very strange. So, and that's both good and also the reason why parents are eventually insane.
I
completely agree with you.
ほとんど何も言うことがないぐらい完全に同意します。
Yeah, you've said just about everything I wanted to say. Yeah, 100%.
Any other questions?
Okay, we can take questions for them later too.
Sure thing.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. I realize I forgot to show you the image of Brian Evanson's book. Windai on the left is one of his recent collection of short stories. The title story, Windai, is his favorite and my favorite too. And he's mainly published by a wonderful publishing house, Coffee House Press, and they did a very nice thing recently. They published 4 books of his at the same time. One new collection of short stories, Collapses of Horses, Write Down, and the 3 reissues of his earlier books. And if you buy all those 4, you get a big, complete picture. That's really nice. And these 2 Japanese translations of his books, translated by me. The left one is The Fugue State, and the right one and Windai, both very, very strong collections of stories. And the latest one, A Collapse of Horses, is even stronger. Okay. And one interesting thing is that these 2 writers, Hiroko and Brian, in Japan, they share the same editor. And he's in the back. Sasaki-kun. Okay. Now we are on to the second panel, the dialogue between Hiromi Itō and Matthew Sharpe. If Hiroko Oyamada is a Japanese female Kafka, it may not be unfair to call Hiromi Itō a Japanese female Whitman. She has a very strong voice that reaches over to you. It's so different from the kind of interior monologue that so much characterizes contemporary Japanese poetry. I'm not saying interior monologue is bad, but I'm just saying she's so different from all that. And her books have been translated into English, 2 of them, Killing Kanoko, the first one, and Wild Grass on the River Bank, which is more recent one, with both wonderfully translated by Jeffrey Angles. And the one on the left is the original of the recent translation, and the one on the right is reads like a novel or essay or something. But no matter what she writes, she even does Ann Landers type of thing, advice column. But no matter what she does, it's always full of the sensibility of the poet. And the American writer she's talking to is Matthew Sharpe. No matter what, Matthew changes from book to book so much, so it's very hard to characterize him. But no matter what he does, we are always impressed by the way he handles the English language. So the fact that the book, the one on the left, Nothing is Terrible, is about this girl who goes to New York with a teacher of hers and goes through a lot of experience. Or the fact that the other one, The Sleeping Father, is about this boy who takes care of his father who sleeps almost all the time because of the accidental overdose and managed to grow up himself by taking care of his father. These facts don't really don't tell you much about the book. It's always the language which is most important, and that element is even more conspicuous in his later works. Jamestown on the left is a book in which he jumbles up the past and the present and the future. So Pocahontas appears, and you have computer, cell phone, and very recognizable, frightening future. And You Are Wrong, his latest novel, is full of very funny descriptive passages about this very nondescript person. Okay. Right. So Hiromi Itō and Matthew Sharpe. And the moderator is Roland Kelts.
Thank you for coming out tonight. I want to echo Moto's comments at the beginning to thank the Asia Society for hosting us again, thanking the Japan Foundation for the support, which is so critical for our projects. I also want to thank A Public Space, the Brooklyn-based literary journal, for being our partner for all these years, and finally the Nippon Foundation in Tokyo for helping us keep going for quite a while. It's a total privilege for me to be up here with these two fantastic writers. Both of them, I love their work, and I think what we feel when we read Hiromi Itō and Matthew Sharpe is this incredible investment in the sentence. In other words, in a unit of expression that can be so powerful if you play with it. And I use the word play quite deliberately. I don't think Moto mentioned this, but he told me years ago that the inspiration for the title of this publication, Monkey Business, was the Chuck Berry song, the late Chuck Berry, unfortunately, called Too Much Monkey Business, from I think 1956. And what's interesting is that in that song, the monkey business is all the annoying stuff you have to deal with every day. Whereas this concept of monkey business is play, is imaginative fun. But I also want to go back to what Rachel said earlier, which I thought was so well put, a kind of reverent irreverence. Because you can't just play. You have to know what you're doing, and you have to have discipline. And, you know, Rachel said you can sit up all night with this publication and keep reading, and it's both quirky and really well made. And I think that's what you were explaining. And I thought that was beautiful, because I feel like that's most of what we look for in culture. Something that's really well made. I mean, these people are good at what they do, but also playful in a way that excites us, that challenges us. And both of these writers, I'm honored to be here, to be with them on the same stage, I think do that with their work. So I'm going to pass the baton along to the two of you and let you read.
Yeah. Thank you, Roland.
Thanks, Roland.
So we start reading, right?
Yeah.
Let's do that. We are
Should we
going
do
to
this?
read your stuff first.
Okay,
and
we've
then-
decided to read our work together. So we'll read together a story of mine first.
Yeah, no, I lost my partner last year, almost like this year, really 1 year ago. And then he was 88, and he was not Alzheimer's, but then he was kind of, confused the last, like several months. So I feel very kind of touched. Anyway, you understand.
Okay, it has no title. I don't know where I am. I'm walking somewhere. The ground is covered with snow. Snow is falling heavily. I don't have a coat on. I can't tell if I'm on a road or in a field. Luckily, I'm wearing warm shoes. My wife got me these last year for my birthday, and she got me this phone that I carry around in my pocket. Hello, honey?
Yes, Bill?
Where am I?
You're out in the backyard. I can see you from the kitchen window.
Quite a blizzard we're having. What did I come out here for?
To collect logs for the fire.
I can't find them.
Keep going straight. You've almost reached them.
I don't think I'll be able to find my way back.
I'll come out and meet you.
My wife's face is next to mine now. Snow is gathering in her white hair. Her name is Gloria.
Come on back inside, darling. Thanks for getting the wood.
Why did my brother send me ashes in the mail?
That wasn't your brother. That was our son, Randy. He's in Chicago. He sent you a letter and you held it near the toaster while you were making the toast yesterday, and it's got burnt.
We're at a doorway now. A strange old woman with white hair is pushing me through it. Don't push me. Leave me alone.
It's okay, Bill, darling. Come inside and warm up. Thank you for bringing the logs.
Hold on. I need to call my wife. The old woman says,
Sit right here in this chair and call her.
Hello, honey?
Yes, Bill.
I don't know where I am.
Don't worry, darling. I'm coming to get you. Really kind of, how to say, it's not overlapped. How to say, なんか、ほら、思い出すっていうの。Yeah, powerfully kind of coming to me.
Thank you.
Story.
Thank you for your reading.
Okay, so next one is mine, and then I'm going to read this, which one? Wild Grass and the Riverbank, and then I'm living in California, that's why I speak English, but I can't read English officially. And then I can't write in English officially. But anyway, so this one is I wrote it after I came here, like 10 years after I came here. So my translator translated from Japanese, but then I thought it's beautiful translation and really wanted to write in this way. So now and then I read it in English. So I start in English. So and he helped me, and then his part and then my part, the second part is actually overlap. So even if you guys don't understand Japanese, just listen. Okay, just wait. Yes. I got on board. I got on and off, then on again. I got on cars, on buses, then on planes. Then we got off the plane. The long belt clattered forward. I put little sister's hand. I urged little brother along the moving sidewalk, advancing steadily. We walked at top speed at the long sidewalk, clattered forward. Long ago, we often walked down this sidewalk. It was fun walking on it. Sometimes I'd shake free of my mother's hand and race along. The sights had not changed. They were just the same. They were the bodies of immigrants who had run out of energy along the way and dried up. There were whole families who had nowhere at all to go and had just laid down there and were sleeping soundly. Mother had once told us the immigrants are dead. Mother had used the unfamiliar word immigrant. Immigrant. She said we were immigrants too. There were even more of their corpses than before. There were piles of dried up corpses in places where there hadn't been any before. There were reasons for them to come to this country, even though they might end up like that, even though they might dry up like that with children. They had left their land where they had lived. They had left their languages. They had left their languages. Adults who had no choice but to come. Children brought by parents who held their hand or carried them along, and when they finally reached the window, they were told, "This isn't where you're supposed to be. Go home. Shut your mouth. Just line up over there." But even though they came to this country, they left behind their languages. And we were just like them.
The man who worked there stared at his computer. "How long?" he asked. "How long have you been away from this country?" I told him. The man who worked there looked at his computer and gave me a stamp. "There is a dirty spot on your passport," the man who worked there told me. "You can't get rid of the dirty spot. In order to solve this problem, you have no choice but to transform so that you look like those who grow here naturally, even though you didn't grow here naturally to begin with. Be carried from your native land to foreign soil, where you will grow wild and propagate. Paspalum urvile, Verbena brasiliensis, Coniza sumatrensis. I picked up little sister and helped little brother out the door. The rain had just stopped outside. It was as hot and humid as the riverbank we'd left behind, filled with light. Everything overgrown shone luxuriant green. They spilled out in large numbers. Alexa cauaranensis, Erigeron canadensis, Sorghum halapense. Ones who were not born here naturally but had transformed into ones who had. Came outside. The passers-by and the ones going home came outside too. Beside me, Coniza sumatrensis started speaking to Verbena brasiliensis. Speaking in her awkward language, she said, "How humid it is. Shouldn't be like this, not here." Verbena brasiliensis responded even more awkwardly. "It was always rain. All winter was rain. Most rainy year in 100 years. Verbena brasiliensis began to stutter in her strong accent, the rain, before finally spitting out the words, "is just like back home."
あなたはこの国にもともとは自生しないが自生するものであるように改める本来の自生地から他地域に運ばれ野生化し繁殖するしか方法がないと係の人は私に言いました。立ち、スズメの冷え、荒れ地花笠、荒れ地野菊。私は妹を抱いて弟をこづいて外に出ました。外は雨上がりで、まるであの河原のように蒸し暑く、光に満ち満ち、生い茂るものは輝く 緑でした。ゾロゾロゾロゾロ出てきました。河原アレクサ、姫昔よもぎ、西番もろこし、大荒れ地野菊。もともとは自生していないが、自生しているものとして改めた者たちが外に出てきました。なんたる、総理、すがりの者たちも、行って帰る者たちも外に出てきました。なんと湿っていることか、こんなはずはないここではと、私たちの脇で大荒れ地野菊が荒れ地花笠に話しかけました。ずっと雨でした。私たちは冬中雨を待っていました。100年ぶりの雨の年と荒れ地花笠がさらにぎこちない言語で答えました。雨がと、荒れ地花笠は激しいアクソンってどもり始め、どもり終えないうちにこんな言葉を吐き出しました。故郷のように。Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah. So you moderate.
Just sheer magic. Aren't these guys great? Wow. I was fortunate to meet Hiromi 3 or 4 years ago when we were in California doing a monkey business tour up the West Coast. We met in San Diego and we traveled up to LA and then San Francisco.
Yeah.
And then I've been very, very fortunate to know Matt Sharpe since I was actually a young man, which is really
a long
time ago. Yes. The two of them, as I said in my brief introduction, have such power in their writing, such power in their sentences, in the cadences and rhythms, the sounds. You know, I'm sure if you don't speak Japanese, you could hear it in Hiromi's rhythmic reading, the way the language just bounces and pricks and moves. And one of the questions I wanted to ask both of them, because they've both written poetry, and I know they both read a lot of poetry, is how they think of poetry in their work when they write prose. I mean, like I said, Hiromi, you have written poetry. Obviously, you started writing poetry, but now you write prose that has a kind of poetic cadence, rhythm, and beat. And I know Matt has read poetry for years, has written some beautiful poems, and his fiction, as I'm sure you heard, also has that sense that there's some music beyond the content. I put it bluntly. So I want to ask you both if you could comment on poetry and prose and your own writing.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you too, because I read the 3 translations that Moto did, and that's all I don't read English, so. But then
could have fooled me.
How could we? We can't call it as a poetry. Your stuff. How different poetry and prose?
Well, maybe only in that I don't know. I mean, I guess I would say my mother is a musician. She's a singer and a songwriter. So maybe just intrauterine I was exposed to and absorbing music, and I think the literature that I have memorized is poetry, and not only is it poetry, but it's poetry with a regular meter and rhyme scheme. Like glory be to God for dappled things, for skies of couple color as a brindled cow, for rose mows all in stipple upon trout that swim, fresh fire coal, chestnut fall, finch's wings. So I have that. When I think of what my body is able to absorb, it's stuff that has things that are approaching the physicality of the body. And so when I'm sitting around writing stories, I'm not leaving my body by any means. I'm not one of those writers who has an out of body experience when he's writing. I'm very aware that I'm sitting there in my pajamas and I haven't bathed in 2 days and I'm a little hungry and I have a hangnail. And so I guess maybe I'm thinking everybody who's reading my book also has a body. How best to let our bodies be in communication with each other, since it's what we have in common. And I think it's through those physical properties of language like rhythm, melody, repetition, the acoustical properties of consonants and nouns. So I think maybe that's where, I mean, I don't know, I'm making up some reason why I want to, I like music. I like music. And when I was listening to Hiromi's recitation, both in English and in Japanese, I felt like I do what I do when I'm listening to like an Elvin Jones drum solo. I was kind of like just riding on top of the rhythm. And so that was maybe before even the sense, I was experiencing the sound with my body. So
your body is, I think so. For me, the most important thing is the body, because I studied as a poet and then writing only about the body and the body aches and everything. Kind of I love menstruation. So that kind of body works, So I've been writing about these things, So everybody's, going out or coming in. So everything is the body. And then, of course, the voice. So when I'm writing or when even I read Matthew's stuff, I have a kind of slight tendency of the dyslexia. So these days I'm reading, everything is in my computer. So I make it, Matthew's one is a kind of prose. This short, but then prose in Japanese. Japanese prose means this way from your side, okay? And then I actually cut half of the lines and then make it everything. It looks like a poetry. So that's how I can grasp. So, for me, the reading experience is also kind of body activity. Yeah. And then I love music. I'm always listening, always. Do you listen music while you are writing?
No, I can't.
How come?
Because then I can't hear my writing.
Oh.
So I listen to it, at every chance when I'm not writing or reading. I can't listen to music when I'm reading or writing because I have to hear the words. My brain is not capable of processing both things at the same time.
You are, reading too loud?
No. Well, I think I'm reading silently, but I'm hearing the words. I have to hear the words in my head. That's why I'm such a slow reader, because I can't read faster than sound. I can't read faster than my mind can sound out the words. Oh. So it's a deficit in a lot of ways because I read very, very slowly. But I guess I have this, kind of extra sense working while I'm reading. Actually, it's probably the same sense that everybody else has. It's just that everybody else can do two things at once and I cannot.
We don't have any typewriter in Japanese culture. So before we, started to use the computer, or it's called a word processor, we started to use it in the mid-'80s. Before that, we didn't have any typewriter, so we had to write by hand. And I have very strong, hitsatsu. Yeah, so when I'm writing one piece of the poem, I need to write so many times, rewrite. So I couldn't use my, hand. So I started to use word processor. In Japan, we could buy the word processor. It means it looks like a computer, but then could do only word processing. For a while, we kind of depend on that. And then, so I started to use the machine, that kind of machine. The very early person, one of those, poets, writers. Then, after I started to use it, I'm using by only one hand. And this hand is, I'm not smoking, so I'm just doing it like this. So it's so fast. And then now, after that, I use my fingers the same speed as I speak. So that makes big differences. Much more kind of speed. Yeah.
And did it change the way you write? Did you see a difference in the poems that you were writing on the machine versus on the hand?
Much faster.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, it's kind of, you can repeat a lot.
Yeah.
I love repetition. Repetition.
Repetition,
yeah.
I noticed you added some repetition that was not on the paper. You were improvising, you were jamming while you were reading
it. You can actually put the power there.
Yeah.
So I learned it, from, American people. I mean, the reason I came to this country, that was 20 more years ago, I was interested in American Indian oral tradition. Has a lots of repetition.
Repetition.
Yeah. So, when you say that corn, then, you plant the corn, you plant the corn. And then corn actually could plant and then grow. And repetition make it grow, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's how I use the word. Yeah. Everything makes it true.
So, yeah, I mean, I don't think you could forget the way Hiromi said immigrants, which could be immigrants, and languages. They lost their languages. And that repetition has a kind of musical power as you hear it again and again. My job here tonight is to get out of the way of these two wonderful writers. So I think we have a little time, I hope, for a couple of questions that you might have after listening to, as what I said earlier, utterly original, beautiful writers here tonight. So if you have any questions, I'd like to open it up to the floor. Yes.
Thank you. My name is Jamie Bunchman. Hello.
Hi. I think the mic's not on, right?
Oh, it's okay.
It's okay with us.
It's okay. You can hear me.
Yes.
I'm interested in visual imagination and people seeing and hearing things when they look at words or when they say them. So I'd like to ask both writers if when you write or when you type on your word processor or computer, or if when you read, whether in half lines or slowly, if you see pictures or you hear sounds spontaneously. I've recently become aware that some people do, and I'm very interested in the phenomenon. And if anyone would, perhaps it's you too, very imaginative minds.
So do you see pictures when you write? Do you visualize something?
What does it mean, visualize?
Like a picture in your mind.
Oh.
Like you see something. Or is it just more the language?
Oh, I don't say anything. Just the language. How about you?
I do.
You do?
I do,
Wow.
yeah. I mean, it depends what I'm writing. If I'm writing, when I dabble in poetry, I don't. Because I was telling this to Hiromi-san before we came out here. Whenever I would set out to write a poem, it would come out terribly. But then I started doing something along the lines of automatic writing. I gave an exercise to my students when I was a teacher called homophonic translation, which means you translate from a language that you don't know. So I would, if my students did not speak Polish, I would give them a poem in Polish and say, okay, translate this. And they would say, translate, well, I don't know Polish. And I would say, yes, exactly, translate it. And so they're using it as a soundscape. And so when I'm writing poetry, I don't see it, I hear it. It's all about the sound, just the felicity of sounds. And I think for me, it depends what I'm reading. If I'm reading abstract poems, more avant-garde poetry, I don't see it because it's more about language. But if I'm reading a story, or if I'm writing a story like this story, I saw this story. I saw it when I was writing it. I think there's a little bit of acting that goes on. I guess in some way, when you're the writer, you're the actor, you're the director, you're the cinematographer, you're the art director, you're the makeup person, you're the prop person. So of course I am visualizing all that stuff for a story. Yeah.
So this piece you wrote, we read.
Yeah.
You actually visualize that, kind of snowy place and old couple.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that happened was, what's the first line? I didn't know what I was going to write before I sat down. So the first sentence is, I don't know where I am.
No.
That was me sitting in my chair, not knowing what to write. But I thought, let's see what happens. I don't know where I am. I'm walking somewhere, and then before I knew it, images were coming to me, and I just was trying to transcribe them.
Oh. Interesting. Yeah, learned a lot.
But I want to ask Hiromi, because you are also a kind of a gardener, right? You're very you know plants very well.
Yeah.
Do you? when you see them, does it affect your writing? I mean, do you visualize a plant? Do you visualize?
No, just the names.
Just the names.
Oh yeah, because I'm interested in all the kind of these invasive plants in Japan, and then I'm living in California, and then Japan has more invasive plants, I think, because it's very humid and then hot, and it's much easier to grow. So most of the plants I see in the Japanese riverbank is mostly invasive plant. I love the names, and first of all, I love the Japanese names, which is like a Kawara Alexawa or Arechi Nogiku. It means that the big, like a wasteland chrysanthemum, that kind of name. But then, they had a Latin name, which is, I didn't understand Latin first, but then I check everything, all the plants' name, and they had a Japanese name and Latin name. So now I'm getting into the Latin name. And now, I'm living in California. This year we had a super bloom, beautiful. I went out to I learned this word, chaparral. This year I learned this word, and beautiful word. So I went out to the chaparral, every day, and then took picture. And then I researched all the names, but all the names is English names, and which doesn't come to me. So I checked the Latin name. Then I named them. I mean, my Japanese. Then the plants could standing up and then face to me. So I think I'm just interested in the names.
That's fantastic. Are we supposed to finish with everybody up here to do last round of questions? So I'm going to ask the first panel to join us here on stage, and I think we have a little bit of time for you to ask questions of any of
We wanted to talk more, right?
Yeah. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, I have a lot of questions for you.
Oh, yeah, me too.
All the writers can comment on each other, I'm told. So you named the plants.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So now this is everyone up here. Hiroko, Moto, Brian, Ted, Matt, and Hitomi. So if you'd like to ask a question, this is your chance. And I think if you got a copy, I guess you might have gotten a copy tonight. I think you're really going to enjoy this issue. It's a kicker. It's a lot of fun. I mean, from page to page. So go ahead, please. Take a shot.
Maybe I'll say something quickly to Hiromi. There's a French writer who you might like who's named Antoine Volodine, but he has a book which is called Herbe et Golem, Grasses and Golems. And every other chapter is just a long list of made-up names of grasses.
Wow.
So.
Wow. Yeah, you give me the name, write down.
I will.
Yeah. Well, New York people are very shy. It's like Japanese, Yeah.
There we go. That's not usually what people say about New Yorkers. But.
That's what I know.
Well, actually, I'm visiting from outside of New York, so I'm not as shy. I had the chance to meet Shibata-san a few months ago and learned a lot about his work as a translator. And as I see the authors on the stage talking about your work and knowing the important role of the translator, I'm wondering what's the relationship between you and the people who did the translation of your work, and do you ever have any disagreements? Because it seems like a tremendous amount of responsibility to put your feeling and meaning in another language.
I think in a way, I don't speak Japanese, and so I just have to trust that Shibata-san is translating me in a good way. And I've heard from a lot of people that he's the best translator in Japan. So I kind of assume that my work is actually better in Japanese than it is in English. But it's funny, I do speak French, and I am translated into French, and I do look at those translations. And, you often realize that you learn a lot about how someone reads you by looking at the translations.
So, Moto and Ted, do you guys ever have any disagreement? Do you ever have any disagreements with your translators?
It's an interesting question. I think I've had the great good fortune of translating work by Murakami, Haruki Murakami, who is also a translator. So he's translated at least as much as he's written of his own work. And so he goes over my translations. And at first I was scared because I thought this guy reads English so well and he's going to be able to pick out every little mistake that I make. But that didn't happen. And it's partly because he is a translator. So I think there is this understanding, if you are a translator and you are also a writer and someone translates your stuff, you give them the same freedom or the same kind of flexibility that you take when you translate. Because when you're translating, you're not going word for word. You are translating rhythms and atmospheres and voices more than anything else. And so if someone reads a translation, if they have enough English to read their translation, and they try to be very literal, that can be a problem. But it doesn't happen as often as one might think.
I've been trying hard to think of any disagreement we had with the translators, but I can't think of any. Am I such a good man? But all I can say is I'm very confident that we have the best Japanese writers we have in Japan in this journal. But I'm even more confident that we have the best translators of Japanese literature in this journal.
And also, I must confess that I owe a great deal to Shibata-san, who helps me with my translations. And when I first go over a text, I'll have nearby usually a native speaker who I can ask basic questions to. And then when I finish my translation, I have Meg Taylor, who's sitting over there, who edits them. So I'm getting input from various people. So it would be a mistake to claim that I, as a translator, am working entirely by myself.
Moto, you told me an amazing story to do with translating. I hope you don't mind if I repeat it. There was a very prominent, successful American writer, I won't say whose work you translated, and in order to verify that you had done a good job, he asked somebody to translate it back into English from Japanese to make sure he had done a good job. That story just blows my mind every time. But I will say that as somebody who also doesn't read Japanese, I have been introduced to so many contemporary Japanese authors thanks to Monkey Business, thanks to the efforts of everybody who puts out Monkey Business. And speaking of having my mind blown, I feel my brain being reconfigured every time I read Monkey Business. The Japanese sense of story, I don't know how to define it exactly, but it is very different from the American or Western sense of story, and it just always opens up possibilities for me. I always come away thinking, wow, you can do that in a story? That's incredible.
I have a kind of follow-up question, and it has to do particularly to the translators. And you kind of elucidated that because part of it is the story, but part of it is, and this is something because I've done some translating too, and I find it's really hard when the metaphors in one language don't really make sense in the other. And what liberties, how do you solve that?
Do you want to take a crack at that?
Yeah. Well, I can't think of any example, but I think the important thing is that what is most important job that metaphor or simile is doing. I mean, if the literal meaning is important, you try to reproduce it literally at the risk of losing maybe humor. But if you judge that the literal meaning is not that important, and the humor, if you think the humor is more important, you may take some liberty of changing something and to try your best to make it funny. So it depends on what that figure of speech is doing.
Any other questions? Yes.
And I know you mentioned the difference in storytelling. I know that it's hard to define that or break that down, but I would love to hear all of you discuss that, the difference in storytelling between American writers and Japanese writers. Please, if you could.
Wow. I think that there is a universality in a way. I don't think the differences should be overemphasized. We have here examples of writers who, I mean, that's one of the reasons why we do this. Right? I mean, why do we come to New York and invite writers from Japan and have events like this? And it's partly because there is, despite the clear distance linguistically and geographically and culturally, there are these overriding similarities and points of discussion, of ways of finding, of expanding one's own literary world by coming into contact with other kinds of writers and other imaginations. And yet, what makes that possible is this kind of broad, overreaching connectivity that people have. I mean, people have always had stories, right? It doesn't make any difference how far back you go or where you go in the world. There have always been stories. So it's almost like we're hardwired, right, to tell and listen to stories. And some types of storytelling may have limits in terms of how far they can travel. But Murakami, again, I remember going to a symposium in Japan about maybe 10 years ago, and there were translators of Murakami from over 30 countries. And all of those, in all of those countries, Murakami was selling well and being widely read and appreciated. And I was looking at, the translators and thinking, this goes back to the question about translation. Thinking, we can't all be brilliant here. There's got to be some turkeys in this crowd, right? But nevertheless, the quality of the storytelling, the type of story that he was telling, communicates everywhere, right? Korea, Russia, you name it. So China. In that sense, I think we might overemphasize the differences, and especially today when the traditional kind of formulaic definitions of kinds of short stories are kind of breaking down. I think that makes it even more possible for people to share stories across cultures and languages.
Yeah, I would just like to add to what Ted's saying and what Matt said. Some of the work I've done as a journalist is in the fields of Japanese popular culture, so anime, Japanese animation, and manga, Japanese graphic storytelling. And I've talked to a number of American scholars and writers who point to the fact that, to some extent, Japanese creative people, Japanese writers, Japanese artists, are not so confined by this sense of reality and unreality, or reality and surreality. So the notion that, and maybe this is Cartesian, I don't know, but the idea that in a lot of Japanese fiction, I think you see what Americans might define as surreal or dreamlike. I mean, a lot of people talk about Haruki Murakami's work as dreamlike, but when I've interviewed Haruki, he doesn't think it's dreamlike. He just writes it, right? It's just the way the characters experience their reality. And so I do think, to some extent, there's maybe a more porous membrane in Japanese culture between what is considered real or unreal. And that the idea that, for example, a Jizo statue could become a poet, and the poet, the Jizo, it's not, how should I say, it's not earmarked. It's not signified. In Hiromi's story, in the new Monkey Business, it just happens. And as you're reading, it just seems like it's natural, completely natural. Whereas by comparison, and again, this is a huge generalization, but by comparison, an American writer is more likely to say, and then this dreamlike thing happened, or this bizarre transformation occurred. Whereas I think in a lot of Japanese stories, again, generally, it's never signified. Things just happen, you know. Frogs, fish fall out of the sky. It just happens, and you just read it, and you go with it, and that is part of your daily life. Again, it's a generalization. There are American writers who accomplish that as well, and there are Japanese writers who don't do that. So, I should let Hiromi.
I want to say something. Okay. I'm interested in. I don't know how to say. Shibata さん、イルイコンってなんていうの？イルイコンって marriage with other creatures. Yeah, because I've been having a man who is not Japanese, can't speak Japanese. So, like, well, and then I've been actually translating, or I've been working for the Buddhist stories, you know, in 8th century, 9th century. There are lots of that kind of stories, you know, the men married with animal. Or, you know, he thinks that this is women, but then actually not women, it's actually animal.
But this is what the Republicans very much fear.
Yeah. Can I read you know? And then you see the same sort of stories in Grimm Tales, or, Ovid. What's the name? Title.
Metamorphosis.
Yeah. And then in the Japanese Buddhist stories, which is not only Japan, you know, they got influenced by China and other things. But then the men, if they have that kind of relationship, that creature is actually animal. And then in the Western stories, always this is actually human. She just happened to be a animal, something like that. So I thought, or maybe, you know, in Japanese culture, we feel much more freer or much more comfortable with having sex with an animal. I don't know. This is not the story. No. But then I think that kind of differences.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
I'll add just quickly, there's a Zimbabwean writer whose name is Dambutso Marachera, who was a very big fan of Dostoevsky, and he was criticized by people for you know, talking about how much he liked Dostoevsky by other African writers. And ultimately he said, you know, writers both live in the country that they live in and live in a country of their own. And writers are able to kind of interact across these national boundaries. And I think that we're all, as writers, people who've been formed not by just Japanese writers or not by just American writers, but by writers from all different directions. And, you know, thinking about what was it that attracted me to Japanese writers and Japanese literature, there was something similar to what Roland was talking about that Japanese writers were doing that I could see American writers starting to do, but that I wanted to see more of. And so I think that those kind of cross-cultural pollinations are really the things that keep literature growing and alive. And the final thing I'll say is, you know, for me, one of the things that has always kind of defined the difference between how the Japanese think about the supernatural and how Americans think about it is, if you look at American and Japanese versions of the same movie, you often see kind of radical differences. Like something like The Grudge, if you know that movie, when they explain that there's a ghost that's haunting the house, the police officer says, in the American version, no, that's ridiculous, that can't happen. And when it happens, the same scene in the Japanese version of that movie, they tell the police officer this, and he says, I see. And that's, you know, it really does say something very different about, you know, how you think about the supernatural and its relationship to the real. Yeah.
You want to say something?
Oh, yeah, I mean, I do see more comfort with irresolution in the stories that I read in Monkey Business than in most of the stories I read in, say, The New Yorker. So, for example, in the tomato story, there's a lot of stuff that I don't think is resolved in the terms that I was educated to believe stories should resolve into. Like, what was the darkness that descended on them, and what is with those tomatoes? You don't really know what's with the tomatoes. So, but you know, to to echo Ted's sentiment, of course, I'm excited to be influenced by what I see as the differences, and I do feel that I'm not limited to being influenced by and I have not been influenced only by American or Western writers. I'm thinking of that great book by Ta-Nehisi Coates where he was talking about conversation among African American literary scholars. Well, who is our Tolstoy? And one of the scholars said, well, Tolstoy is our Tolstoy. What do you mean, who's our Tolstoy? Tolstoy is our Tolstoy. So, of course, everybody can talk to each other and learn from each other.
So I think it's only fitting, since we're ending with Oyamada-san's tomatoes, that we give Oyamada-san the last word for today.
そうですね。はい。私は作者ですけど、すべてをコントロールしているわけではないので、皆さんが読んでわからないと思ったり終わっていないと思ったことは、私も全く同じようにわからないし分かっていない。
I'm the author, but I'm not in control of everything. So if something strikes you mysterious or unresolved, probably I'm just as mystified as you are.
その分からなさを信じるっていうことこそがそれを作品にし得ているんだと思います。
I think that the fact that I am able to believe in that mystery makes this story work of art.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thanks for coming.
Roland, can I have a few minutes? Okay. Commercial. Okay. The copy you have received is our latest issue, issue 7. All the past issues are available in ebook form, and some issues are still available in paper form. You can purchase them at our website? Tumblr. If you look for us on the Google, it's not just enough to type in monkey business, because there's so much monkey business going on this world. So monkey business, new writing from Japan, and you get to us. And last of all, I've left my greatest thanks to our sponsor of this journal. I mean, we've been very grateful to Asia Society, Japan Foundation, a public space for this event. But the journal itself is entirely supported by the Nippon Foundation, and they have been generously supporting us for 7 years. And I cannot thank you enough to them. Thank you, Nippon Foundation. Saito-san, Tanaka-san, thank you very much.